Here's what's really strange and quite inexplicable about this story. A few years ago I walked into an auction viewing and looked up at a painting on the wall, and I was instantly struck by the certainty that it was painted by Vermeer. And then, less than 48 hours after buying it, I found his signature on it. And you know what makes it even more weird is that the only thing I knew about Vermeer at that time was that he was the artist who painted this. This is the story of that little auction painting. It's as much a mystery story as it is about art, because this is by far the strangest and most magical painting you will ever see. In fact, I'm pretty certain that once you hear the story, you'll never look at art the same way again. And there's one more thing to mention before we get started. When you look at the painting, you won't actually be able to see it, because I think there's something else going on in this painting, not just the literal image. Look closely as we go along and you might get ahead of where we're going. So welcome to Vermeer's Child. I think it's probably the most unique channel on YouTube. If I could tell you this whole story in one episode, I would. There's too much going on, so I'm going to break it up into bite-sized chunks. The purpose of the series is to lay out everything I know and don't know about this painting, so you can decide whether you think it's a copy, a forgery, or a long-lost masterpiece. To help you see it more clearly, I'm going to film this series in 4K, so watch it in 4K if you can, and use a phone or a tablet to view it, because the bigger the screen, the softer the image will be, particularly when we start to look at fine details. And also, it's much easier with those devices to stop and zoom in when something catches your eye. The auction catalogue didn't make the painting look too promising. It actually looked a lot like junk. But I was interested in old frames, and I thought that if I could pick it up for maybe $150, I could use the frame for one of my paintings. But when I first saw the little painting high up on the wall at the viewing, it really hit me hard. I had this full-on emotional overload. It was kind of a strange mixture of extreme elation and blind terror. But at the same instant as those emotions hit me, there was also something else. And it wasn't just an idea or a guess or intuition. It was clear-eyed, absolute certainty that I was looking at a painting by Vermeer. The auction was delayed because of COVID and then switched from in-house to online. That gave me time to do a bit of research, and I found out that the auction painting was almost certainly a copy of this painting by another Dutch artist, Peter de Hooge. Now remember that I told you that the only thing I knew about Vermeer was that he was the painter who created the famous girl with the pearl earring, and so it won't surprise you to know that I'd never heard of de Hooge. But incredibly, someone who did know him was Vermeer. You see, de Hooge moved to Vermeer's hometown of Delft in 1652 and stayed for about 7.5 years. So these two painters knew each other, and it seems they also influenced each other. I'll just show you how the auction painting compares, superficially at least, to de Hooge's painting. We'll come back to dissect the difference in detail between the two paintings in a future episode. The de Hooge painting is about a third higher and a third wider than the auction painting, but that makes it twice the size in terms of its surface area. The things worth noting at this point are the different depictions of light in the two paintings, in particular the strong contrast between light and shadow in the smaller painting, and also note the warmer colours that the artist has chosen to depict the colour of the light in the smaller painting. The other thing to be aware of is that the de Hooge painting is thought to have been painted in the period 1660 to 1663. Don't get hung up by what appears to be the far superior clarity of the larger painting, which gives the impression that it's of much higher quality, because the little auction painting is about as dirty as a cheese board after a party, and it's covered with dark brown varnish. I ended up having to pay a lot more than I planned. As a matter of interest, I think it cost me about the same for the small painting as this other famous painting was once sold for. When I got home, I looked to see if I could find a signature, because it looked really old, and I hoped that maybe de Hooge had also painted it, maybe as a copy of his larger painting. But there was nothing. I took a few photos of it to look at when I was away from home. Later that first night, when I was reading a book about de Hooge, I looked through the photos and zoomed in on the details. And that's when I found a mark that looked a lot like a D, and another mark off to the left of it that wasn't clear, but looked intentional. The two marks were overpainted with a thin, milky white paint, and I could only see dark smudges between them. The next day when I looked at the painting itself, I couldn't even find the marks that I'd seen in the photo. And I'll show you why that was. It's all to do with the direction and intensity of the light and the amount of reflection that the white overpaint throws back at you. When I lit the painting from the left in particular, the marks became much more defined. As I moved the light around, I realised that the mark on the left looked a bit like an M, and the one on the right, the D, wasn't quite joined up. So I took some high-resolution photos and opened them up in a photo editor, which allowed me to play with the shadows and contrast to see if I could work out what I was looking at. Something really strange happened while I was working on this late at night in a dark room, and I won't go into it in detail here because it'll freak some people out. But let's just say, at the very moment I turned away from my computer and had given up trying to work out what I was looking at, there was a hair-raising intervention, and when I turned back to look at my screen, it was flashing with blue lights, and I could make out what appeared to be a possible signature of Vermeer. I knew what Vermeer's signatures looked like because any information that I found out about de Hoogh came with big slabs of text about Vermeer, because he became the far more famous of the two painters. This is a tracing of Vermeer's signatures from the Essential Vermeer website, and as you can see, Vermeer had quite a variety of signatures throughout his life. The older signatures are quite different from the later signatures. There's one signature that's a bit of an anomaly, slightly reversed, but most of them are fairly consistent towards the latter part of his career. And this is the sort of signature that I think that I'm looking at in this little painting. Essentially, it looks a bit like this. It's a Roman M with an I or J in the middle of it. He used to make that as a monogram with a V for Vermeer, and obviously the two E's, the R with a flourish under it, coming under the bottom of it there. Sometimes the flourish is a bit more pronounced, and sometimes it was virtually non-existent in his earlier signatures. But that's basically what I think I'm looking at in this painting. So this is the area that looks like a signature. And as you can see, there's what appears to be a straight line on the left-hand side, and a sloped line with sort of two sides to it on the right-hand side, and a bit of an indeterminate shape in the middle, although there is a slight line just running down here. There's a strange shoulder bump there, little serif on the end, and over on this side you can see that there's a couple of lines coming down either side and a bit of a turnover just around this area here, and something that could be a flourish. I don't know how far it goes. And in the middle there's just a white area that's been completely obliterated. And you can see the thick white paint that runs across the top of this area. It's virtually, looks like someone's deliberately painted this over the top of that part of it. Although, to be fair, there's quite a bit of white paint over the rest of this area as well. So that's the way it appears on the actual painting. Now I'll show you what it looks like after it's been enhanced in a photo editor to bring up the shape of these dark marks in between. So when you open it up in the photo editor, some things get more clear and some get less distinct. For example, the line that was down the left-hand side, which used to run a bit further down here, is now the white paint over the top of it's been enhanced more than the actual mark under it. It's just one of the quirks of photo editors. So you can see only now the first bit of it. The dark knob at the top seems to have a bit more shape to it, but is still quite unclear. The line that runs across the top and the bump just there, and you can see the line that runs across here to the little serif, that seems to be quite distinct, and that's inconsistent with Vermeer's signature largely. The line through the middle here is the double dark line is pretty distinct now, and you can see over on the right hand side you can see a quite crisp inner and outer mark still for the mark that looks a bit like the R, which runs around to about there, and then the flourish under it looks like it goes all that way. Maybe that's just picking up something other than the flourish part. It's impossible to tell, of course. But of all the marks that could have come up in between these two, the one on the M and the one that looks like the R, you now can see, if you have to probably squint a little bit, but you can see a bit of a line just there. You can see a dark shadow running around here, and you can see some thickness running around there. So that mark does look like an E. And the one to the left of it is a little less distinct. It's a bit smudgier, but you can also see that there's a similar sort of a shape to it just there and running around there, although there's only just sort of a blob here on this side. It's a bit hard to work out what that is. But
again, it could be any mark, of course, but it does look like it could well be two E's. And I think that the right-hand E, if that's what it is more distinct than the left.
The only thing that I was certain of, after examining this area of the painting in as much detail as I could, is that the marks are intentional and that they do form part of a signature. Obviously, with so much of the area overpainted, I can't say beyond any reasonable doubt that Vermeer's signature is under the white paint, but because of the unique features of his signatures, it seems more probable than not that the marks are supposed to be a Vermeer signature. By all means, have a look at the marks yourselves and reach your own view, but from my perspective, there are two distinct possibilities that arise from these marks. The painting's either a forgery or it's an original. I live a long way from the centres of the art universe, and also our local art museum wasn't interested in looking at the painting, so I asked some overseas institutions and experts for advice. Apart from one email, I didn't mention the Vermeer angle because it seemed so ridiculous. But we were at the start of a pandemic and everyone was preoccupied with their own problems, so I was essentially locked down with this strange little painting, with nothing in my favour other than time. I decided that I would immerse myself into the world of Vermeer and see if I could find out enough about how he painted to rule him out as the possible artist responsible for the little painting. I called this my Killing Vermeer project. But Vermeer's a survivor and he's put up an extraordinary fight. In the next episode, I'm going to show you how I tried to kill Vermeer off by seeing whether this is actually even an old painting. And to do that, we'll be looking closely at the back of the painting and bringing some cold-blooded science to the investigation. And there'll be a few amazing things to be seen, including an ancient label with two names on it and surprisingly some drawings. But the most remarkable thing is that the painter himself has something to say about the age of his painting. Please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and if you give this video a thumbs up, YouTube will send it out to other people with similar interests. Thanks very much for watching.